What can drones do for science? That's what I want to cover on today's Science Spotlight, Drones for Scientific Research. Science Spotlight number 11. I'm Dr. Mark Williamson. Let's get started. So, to orient us, I thought I'd start with this 2015 article, Science, Technology, and the Future of Small Autonomous Drones by Farino and Wood. So it gives a bit of an overview of drones, starting defense applications, but it's certainly been growing in all sorts of avenues from transportation, communication, agriculture, even disaster mitigation and environmental preservation. And the article really gives some interesting examples of what drones can and are being used for, anywhere from recording local weather to monitoring crops to surveys, whether that's mining, energy, infrastructure, and then also things like humanitarian aid or even transportation of goods. Now, we're not quite to the point where you can just simply order a pizza by drone, like some of the movies, but certainly some of the more niche cases of small payloads have been successfully delivered with drones. And now some challenges. It's important because any sort of use of a technology is going to come with drawbacks, and what challenges you face will limit what you can actually do with it. The review looked at scaling, propulsion, maneuverability, power, manufacturing, sensing, control, and modality. So a lot of those will be scientific and technical. And so in the future section of this review, the authors say, yeah, those roadblocks, scientific, technical, are probably solvable. One of the real more unknown ones is the regulation that's still up in the air. And one of the things I've learned with drones, like unmanned drones, is actually there are still in place line of sight limitations, at least in the US. So you can't fly it farther than you can see it. And so that will limit what you can exactly do with drone research. So the paper kind of shows different types of drones, anywhere from quadcopter to a fixed wing to even really tiny, almost pint-sized or insect-sized drones. So they can come all in all shapes and sizes. Particularly of note in this review, they also kind of have an example of how drones could be used in rescue situations, anywhere from the fixed wing, sort of monitoring, smaller quadcopter to look at destruction, delivering materials with that, or even those tiny little swarms to look for like chemical hazards, and sort of more modular cage robots into complex structures to search for things like survivors. So there's a wide range of like what it even means to be a drone. So let's take a step back here because we're thinking about drones for scientific research. So it's good to think about like what drones are being used overall. And so there's a wide range, anywhere from military to arts and culture, so like shooting cinematography, certainly a lot of recreational, hobby drones, medicine, transportation, communication, precision agriculture, disaster and environmental reasons. And nestled within this overall is going to be some sort of niche of scientific research. Not that scientific research won't interlap with these different areas, but certainly for our purposes, um, we're interested specifically in drones and how you can do that for scientific research, whether that's for ecology, whether that's for other biological or even, chemical or geological physics even. Though, given the drone's nature, things like biology, atmospheric sciences, those probably have more applications. All right. So as I'm kind of thinking through like what you can do in research with a drone, I tried to come up with different broad classes of use. And I think I came up with four categories that sort of cover the gambit of what you can use drones for. So on the top here, we have collection. So you can use the drone to collect samples, whether that's microbial out of the air, DNA from a hard to access area like whale blow or environmental DNA. It could be biomass from, plants and high trees, insects, flying insects, etc. On the other side of things, so instead of collecting things, you can deposit things, deposition. It could be biological in nature, whether you're planting seeds, maybe releasing insects. It could be chemical, like spraying pesticides or other things, especially in precision agricultural. It could be even technological, maybe putting sensors somewhere, putting even other little drones to like explore a rocky crag, or even maybe tagging something. Then on the bottom here, the more sort of what you would say out of the box or more obvious, most obvious use of a drone, because most drones are pre-built with cameras, is observation, collecting images, video. But it could go beyond that. It could be sensor data, whether it's temperature, thermal data, multi-wave, particle counts, even, sort of not so much physical collection, but more like digital collection. And then finally, there's the catch-all of other. You could think of those as things like deterrence. That would be an example, like warding off birds, attraction, maybe having some sort of lure, or even just general purpose manipulation of the environment that maybe doesn't fall within collection or deposition. So I think as we're thinking about, again, drones for scientific research, this is the kind of things they can do, broadly speaking. Next, let's zoom out higher to this tertiary review. So this is a review of reviews from 2024. Good to kind of give a picture of what's going on in the field. So mostly just going to look at some of the figures to give us a high level view. So figure 4 has the included systematic literature reviews over time. You see it's obviously exploded. There's anywhere from construction to things like forestry, precision agriculture, and smaller areas like even wildlife or water management. Now, for figure 7, looks at the type of drone, the platform. You can see, again, that has also exploded as they've become more popular. Quadcopter is now by far uh, the most used, pretty ubiquitous, but some of the older standbys like the fixed wing are still have a decent presence. Another figure from that review, looking at the different brands, we can see that by and large it is dominated by a single brand, DJI, which is, I believe, a Chinese drone company. So you are sort of limited by where you can actually buy, and there might be some sort of security or infrastructure or procurement limitations given that nature. And then also on figure 9, so the payload, so what the drone is carrying, mostly by the imaging. See, most of them, this orange here can be a digital camera, but there are smaller uses for multispectral cameras, even hyperspectral, thermal, and sort of most advanced or the most expensive would be something like a LiDAR. Finally, for figure 11, I pulled the key that's at the bottom here. It really helps show what's actually being done, what actual areas of inquiry the drones are being used for across these reviews. And you can see there are a lot of science related things like air quality, archaeology, that was interesting, biodiversity, fire, forestry, grasslands. Could make a case for health, precision agriculture, certainly applied. Um, Wastewater management, and of course, wildlife probably being the most relevant of, yeah, watching wildlife with these drones. All right, so another useful tool in looking into drones, useful resource is this Comprehensive Insights 2025 by Singh and Kumar. It is very in detail. This is a preprint from arXiv. Definitely beyond the scope of this video to go through everything. They start with the history of drones, the classification, architecture, and so on and so forth. But this is a great reference. And we'll briefly cover useful things when we're thinking about applying drones for scientific research. That is going to be classifications, applications, and challenges. We'll look at each of those in more detail. So first, classifications. It's really helpful, this graph with the different classifications, anywhere from size to aerodynamics, landing altitude, weight, flying mechanism, payload, etc. And because really whatever limitations or features your drone has, that's going to dictate what you can actually do with the research. If you have a very small size, you can get into small spaces, but you can't carry very much. And your weight will also matter, or where you can go, what you can hold, your range, certainly very relevant, and even sort of the aerodynamics will matter. So that's useful classification. Other helpful thing is the applications. We've seen various applications lined up. This is another one. They have broad applications for drones. And though there isn't one specifically for scientific research, but you can make the case that the environmental monitoring and the agriculture would be two relevant ones. The environmental monitoring is more the basic science, so like wildlife tracking, deforestation monitoring, air quality analysis. And then agriculture would be sort of the applied side of things, crop monitoring, precision agriculture, pest and control, and irrigation management. And then challenges, again, whatever limitations of the system will translate to limitations in the research able to be done. And we've already talked about things like regulatory challenges, whether it's cybersecurity or compliance. Um, Certainly, there are economic challenges with cost, technical challenges in a variety of areas. But one that I thought was particularly useful for scientific research that wasn't covered elsewhere was environmental challenges, especially things like weather resistance. If you're going to be trying to capture data or samples in an environment that you otherwise can't get to, there might be some more extreme weather, extreme environments that you're going to have to overcome to get that information. So that needs to be built into how your drone is set up and how you work with it. All right, so now let's sort of shift gears to more field specific overviews. So certainly the biggest basic biology used for drones would be ecology. So there's this paper called Drones in Ecology, 10 years back and forth. The authors, Anderson, Gonzalez, and Gaston, 10 years ago. So this was in 2025. In 2015, they had a paper going about drones, and sort of they predicted a revolution in spatial ecology with drones. And so now they're kind of looking back at the past decade and seeing how that turned out. And, they would say that there are mixed results. Some avenues have matured while others are still lacking. Certainly, there's a lot of imaging improvement from near infrared to hyperspectral and everything in between. Some trade-offs they talk about. One of the benefits over the past decade is a lot of off-the-shelf product improvements, so that usually commercial products are good enough to just use as is, at least with imaging. They're increasingly being able to use the sample in accessible places, and there's even like DIY platforms to program them. There are lower costs to surveying, especially with more traditional like plane surveys. However, there are some hidden costs like greater computation costs and need for data analysis standardization, because now drone research is in many ways a big data discipline. Some of the interesting future things that they mentioned that I think would be really interesting for drones to be doing more of was things like nighttime flying, understory flying, advanced drone mobility for underground avenues, even under the soil. They talk about like this like worm bot. So it goes beyond what we think of drone. We think of drones as flying, but they don't have to be flying. They could be under the soil. They could be amphibious. Specific avenues for research, certainly aerial biology, sampling from the air is be very interesting. Seeing more of that, and even working with not just one drone, but drone swarms for things like wildlife monitoring, etc. And some tables that, if you want as a reference in this paper, are helpful. They have the key points summarized. They have major advancements and emerging opportunities summarized as well in their various tables. And really great pictures they have of examples. These ones are all I would consider on the sort of the collection class. So one drone is collecting foliage. The other one is the so-called snot-bot, flies in and gets whale blow from their blowhole, get DNA, microbiome stuff. That's really interesting. And then this fixed-wing aircraft is collecting insects. And there's even sort of another view of one of those cage robots. This is the Elios drone. It could be used for exploring caves underground because it can fly, but it also has a protected cage that can kind of bounce around a little bit. All right, another really important field, specific field, more the applied science would be precision agriculture. So there's this review of drones in precision agriculture. Really helpful. They looked over 100 articles. They talked about the different drone systems, whether it's fixed wing, quadcopter, hybrid, foldable wing. They looked at the different control systems, software, payload, and payloads. And these are all things that need to be taken account of when you're designing research for a drone and designing your drone. And we'll go into more details in diagnostic interventional applications as well as related technologies and challenges and perspectives. They have great summary tables of each of those. So we'll look at that in a moment. They have a nice figure here of looking at the full diagram of the drone system. You don't just have the drone, you have the sensors as well as the control station and communication. And the different parameters of your different types of drones will obviously matter. All right, so let's go to diagnostic applications. That is table 4. They look at the different applications in precision agriculture that you could use to diagnose things. So first and foremost would be things like crop monitoring. You can look at plant health, detection of diseases and pests, water stress. You could, of course, map, image things, 2D, 3D imaging, multispectral thermal imaging. And you can assess things like soil and environment, soil quality, moisture, drainage, weed detection. So these are all diagnostic abilities of drones. Of course, you don't just need to diagnose, you can intervene. So there's interventional applications in precision ag, like precision spraying, probably being the most direct. You can apply fertilizer, pesticide, herbicide. You can drop other things like seeding and planting, whether it's trees or seedlings. You could do pollination, even artificial pollination, or releasing other things like insects for biological control. So those are useful for what's actually done in precision agriculture and what types of things could be done in other fields. Some related technologies that go into drones, certainly GIS, Internet of Things, AI, and even planning systems like harvest planning. And finally, again, challenges and perspectives. That's always important to keep in mind, whether it's regulation, technology, and even things like adoption. That's especially relevant in precision ag because maybe it works, but it might not work for a small farm with a too high of an initial cost. And that might be relevant for scientific research, where, yeah, sure, if you have a large research project, you might be able to do some of these things, but you might not if you just have a small research project. And even there's even ethical and social challenges that you need to think about and have a perspective on. All right, so kind of the closing of this spotlight, we'll be looking at specific papers where the specific projects using drones for research that I think is useful to highlight. The first one in 2025 was a novel drone sampling method for lower atmospheric fungal spores. So they're collecting fungal spores. They have this nice little home-built system of like a pump and a little inlet so they can suck in air and get these fungal spores. And this is powered by our Arduino. So they can attach it to a drone, fly the drone around, turn it on, and suck up air wherever they need to. And the idea of this is to have, this system where they travel, turn on their little pump. Now they have to control this with a separate control system. So they have to have that all built in and be able to talk to the Arduino, but then you can fly it around, get the data, and then go from there. Another similar one, though, in 2024 on bioaerosols sampling, it was really, really ingenious. They actually have this 3D printable device that they can actually attach the drone to its landing gear and use the landing gear to open and close this to open up the agar plate to the air. So they don't have to actually have a separate system like the Arduino little controller. They can actually just control it with everything on the drone. So that's really interesting. So they can fly around and collect microbial samples on their agar plates. Perhaps the most charismatic type of research that's to be done with drones and biology is collecting baleen or just other types of whale blow samples. So they fly a drone down to its blowhole and collect samples from it. These are often called snot-bots because they're essentially getting snot from the whales. And so they can collect that. That's from this paper here, 2024. I went and dug into the supplemental so I could get a picture of the drone. It's a quadcopter and a little more images of going at the whales. And then the final paper, which goes into that other category, which I think is really interesting, is deterrence of birds with an artificial predator. So a lot of times birds will be trouble landing on things like golf courses, other places where people don't want birds, and then you need to try to deter them without having to like shoot them or something. And so these researchers designed an artificial falcon. So it's a fixed wing drone. They're able to fly and scare away birds. And in fact, it did work. So if 100% is the number of sites without flocks, so that'd be good. With the control, most of them, it was very low. So most of them had flocks of birds on them, most of the sites. If you used a drone, it did pretty well, about 80% effective. But then when you use a robot falcon, it got up to about 100% and it worked faster. So it was a successful deterrent. All right, with that, I will close here. Here's all the references and also in the description of this video for all the papers that I looked at. Thanks for joining me. Certainly you can like, subscribe, leave a comment. Especially, I would love a comment on what topic I should cover next. But until next time, thanks for joining me for this Science Spotlight.